Global impact. Russia seizes billions from the United States. Russia has made a significant move in the economic war against the United States by seizing assets from two major American banks, Bank of New York Mellon and JP Morgan. This action, which has been interpreted as financial retaliation, affects assets worth a considerable amount, which has caused concern in Washington financial circles. This Russian move is perceived as a blow to the heart of the Western financial system, as it affects two of the most influential banks in the United States. This economic conflict has its roots in the sanctions imposed on Russia in 2022 when Ukraine, with the support of the West, froze assets of Sberbank, the largest Russian bank. However, Russia claims that more than a freeze, it was a theft, since the funds were transferred to Western banks. In response, Russia has decided to confiscate assets from US banks, marking a new phase in this economic war parallel to the military conflict in Ukraine. This measure has raised concerns about the safety of assets in the global financial system, as it shows how geopolitical conflicts can directly impact international banks and companies. In addition, there is a possibility that other economic powers may take similar measures in the future if they feel under economic pressure, which could jeopardize the stability of the global financial system. The situation also highlights the financial connections between Ukraine and the United States and how unilateral decisions to freeze or confiscate assets can have global repercussions. As the conflict progresses, financial tensions are expected to continue to affect businesses and governments around the world, especially if other countries follow Russia's lead. This event raises a reflection on the use of the financial system as a weapon in conflicts, which could lead to a rethinking of the rules that govern the global economy and the security of international assets. Russia has intensified its economic confrontation with the United States by seizing assets of two of the largest and most influential banks in this country, Bank of New York Mellon and JP Morgan. This measure is seen as a direct response to the economic sanctions imposed by the West, and in particular as retaliation for the decision taken in 2022 by Ukraine and the G7 to freeze assets of Sberbank, the largest bank in Russia. This action, unprecedented in terms of the magnitude of the assets involved, reflects a significant escalation in the economic war that runs parallel to the military conflict in Ukraine. One of the most striking aspects of this situation is the perception of vulnerability now faced by Western banks that were traditionally considered untouchable. The seizure of assets has not only shaken these financial institutions, but has also called into question the security of funds in the global banking system. Historically, assets deposited in banks in developed countries were considered safe, regardless of political fluctuations or international conflicts. However, Russia's decision sets a precedent that could change the way countries and institutions manage their reserves and assets abroad. This financial conflict has its roots in the growing tensions between Russia and the West since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, but it worsened in 2022 when Ukraine, with the support of the United States and the European Union, decided to freeze Sberbank's assets in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia accused the West of going beyond a simple asset freeze, arguing that in reality, the funds were confiscated and transferred to banks in the United States and other Western countries. This act, which Russia describes as theft, has been the trigger for the recent measure to seize assets from US banks. The most disturbing thing about this situation is the message it sends to the rest of the world. Western banks are no longer immune to financial retaliation from countries under sanctions. For decades, nations in conflict with the West have been subject to economic sanctions that included the freezing of assets in foreign banks. However, this is one of the first times that a country has responded directly, confiscating assets from institutions of great weight in the global financial system. In addition to the direct impact on US banks, this Russian measure could have broader effects on global confidence in the financial system. Investors, companies, and governments could begin to question whether it is safe to keep their assets in banks in countries that could be involved in future conflicts or sanctions. This fear could lead to a reassessment of investment policies and increased distrust of Western financial institutions. Another consequence of this economic escalation is the risk that other countries will follow Russia's example. Powers like China, India, or Iran, which have also faced sanctions from the West at some point, could take similar measures if they perceive that their own assets abroad are at risk. This could trigger a series of seizures and embargoes that would jeopardize the stability of the global financial system as we know it. The seizure of assets from JP Morgan and Bank of New York Mellon not only has financial implications, but also represents a challenge to the power and influence of the United States and its allies in the global economic sphere. These institutions are not only central to the functioning of the US financial system, but also have a significant presence in international markets. The fact that Russia has been able to seize its assets is an example of the extent to which economic reprisals are taking place in the current context. On the other hand, Washington's response will be crucial to understanding the future development of this situation. The United States has led the imposition of economic sanctions on Russia since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, but now faces an unprecedented challenge. Russian retaliation could force the United States to reconsider its strategy regarding the use of economic sanctions as a tool of geopolitical pressure. In the long term, this dynamic could affect the way the United States and its allies manage their economic and political hegemony. In addition, this situation raises important questions about globalization and the interconnection of financial markets. For years, the world's economies have become increasingly interconnected, with investments and assets flowing freely across borders. However, the growing trend of using sanctions and asset freezes as weapons in geopolitical conflicts could discourage countries from maintaining this financial interdependence.